I'm Gayla Brock-Woodland. I'm Chief Operating Officer for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. This topic is so important to everybody in this room. Every single one of you is a leader, and you want to know how to build resilient, innovative teams that succeed at a time of massive change. I'm delighted to introduce Eric Termuende. And Eric and I, he's so good at his homework, that's how you know he's going to be a great speaker. He wanted to come this morning and listen to our discussion, and he and I talked for probably 45 minutes, so I can tell you're in for a treat. I want to talk a little bit about leaders. We're all leaders, and we're leaders on so many levels, right? You're a leader of an organization, you're a leader of a team, and you're a community leader as well. And you're leaders for a better life for all, which is our mission, a better life for all Canadians. So you're leaders on so many levels. But while leadership is exciting, I think all of you would agree with me that it's exciting, but it's hard work. And I always say right now that reading the media first thing in the morning is an act of courage, right? You know, we're living in really, really disruptive, difficult times. And so being a leader is more important than ever, and it's more difficult than ever. And so as leaders, we really need to refuel. So this is your refuel today. This is what Eric is going to help us with, refueling for leadership. And he is all about research. So he is going to give you a research-based blueprint for successful leadership. And you're going to receive a practical guide to building teams that are more productive, engaged, creative, and innovative. And we, of course, encourage you to share this with whoever you wish. Before Eric takes the stage, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their generous support. And I'd like to welcome Melissa Cotton. She and I just met in the green room, but typical Ottawa, we have like 5 close contacts very much in common. And Melissa's pretty impressive. First, let me talk about CN because they've been a long-term and very important partner. Melissa, of course, is Director of Government Affairs with CN. And CN has approximately 23,000 railroaders. They transport 250 billion worth of goods annually to a wide range of businesses. And that ranges from, of course, resource products to manufactured products to consumer goods across the rail network of approximately 20,000 route miles spanning Canada. Melissa joined CNN would be interesting too. CN in 2022. She's a seasoned GR professional. She spent time working on Parliament Hill. This is all very impressive. Wait till you hear this. She served 6 years as managing director of the Liberal Research Bureau. She provided advice to the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and government MPs, all while managing a team of 40. And so, Melissa, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Gayla. Merci. I don't think I realized that she was going to give you my biography, but thank you for that. Bon après-midi tout le monde. As Gayla mentioned, my name is Melissa Cotton. I'm the head of federal government affairs for CN Rail. And I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional territories of the peoples of the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta and the homeland of the historic Northwest Métis and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. CN is a proud member of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and a proud sponsor of this year's AGM and convention. But we're also a proud member of many of your chambers as well locally. On behalf of the more than 25,000 people who operate CN's North American network, who live and work in many of your communities, thank you for all that you do every day. This is a critical time for Canadian supply chains, for the companies that get our exports to market, and for the families struggling with the cost of living pressures. Canadian railways provide shippers with the lowest freight rates amongst the market economies, along with being the safest in North America, and we're proud of that. Rail is also the greenest mode of ground transportation, representing only 3.6% of Canadian transportation emissions. Canadian Chamber's vision is to help build Canada of thriving business opportunity, a strong economy, and a better life for all. The purpose of this AGM and convention is to develop public policy resolutions that the Chamber can advocate for to achieve that vision. CN is proud to sponsor this year's event as a world-class transportation leader and trade enabler. Central to the economy, to the customers, and to the communities it serves, CN safely transports about 300 million tons of natural resources, manufactured products, and finished goods throughout North America every year. Our 18,600-mile rail network connects Canada's eastern and western coasts with the southern coast of the US. And I'd be remiss, I don't know if we have any folks from Northern Canada right now, but we are the only railway that serves our northern partners. And our thoughts are certainly with our friends in Northwest Territories currently. Our keynote speaker today, Eric Termuende, is a workplace culture and leadership expert. He will discuss how leaders can future-proof their teams so they can thrive in the face of adversity and uncertainty. He will share his research-backed blueprint for successful leadership in a world that has yet to be created. And he'll provide you all with a practical guide to building your teams that are more productive, engaged, creative, and innovative. And as we look at what the future of work is going to look like, this type of blueprint will prove to be invaluable. To use a railway analogy, the need to ensure that we are keeping things on track and leaving the station on time has never been more important. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your convention.
Before Eric takes the stage, we have to say more amazing things about you. So in addition to all the things that Melissa talked about, Eric has delivered hundreds of keynotes, and he was just talking about all the places he traveled. And interestingly enough, Candace got to hear Eric last week. The world is a small place. And he's worked for leading companies, Amazon, Coca-Cola, IBM, Zoom, and Toyota, to name just a few. And his research has been included and featured in Forbes, Fast Company, and other prominent publications. Here's the best one. He's been named one of the world's top 100 emerging innovators by American Express, and is also a former World Economic Forum global shaper. What haven't you done? Eric, stage is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kayla. I really do appreciate it. One of the things that I haven't done, and exactly where I want to start, is I haven't been on this stage yet. But I do want to say that this has been a dream of mine for about 8 years now, and I mean that very seriously. I was born and raised in Cranbrook, British Columbia. Mom and Dad are still there. Grew up there for 17 years. I came here to the University of Calgary to get my education. I started my very first small business here, and it turns out that the Chamber of Commerce of Calgary was one of our very first clients. And I said back 8 years ago that maybe one day, I would be able to work with, in some capacity, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So if we can just put our hands together for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and putting this together, it really does mean a lot to me. Since then, though, I've spent my time studying great companies and great leaders, trying to figure out what separates great leaders from the rest of the pack. I've surveyed tens of thousands of people, worked with hundreds of companies from around the world, and I'm really proud of some of the work that we've got to do. However, I'm not going to start with the excitement, sort of firing from the hips. Instead, I'm going to start with a bit of a confession. I travel around the world to talk to leaders to help them prepare for the future. And the confession, of course, comes in that if the past 3 years have taught me anything at all, it's that I'm really bad at predicting the future. Maybe you are too. Did anyone expect that this would be the #1 commodity in the past 3 years? I didn't see that one coming. How about the fact that Taylor Swift would be able to put Travis Kelce on the map? Of course, that's not entirely true. I didn't see that coming. I certainly didn't think that the Mexican Congress would unveil aliens. That was not on my 2023 bingo card whatsoever. In fact, I just started to watch that David Beckham tour. First of all, I didn't see anything that Elon Musk would be doing. I didn't see anything, when I saw this David Beckham show. They started to predict, I saw in a magazine in 1998, what David Beckham would look like when he was 50 years old. And they didn't quite get it right, but I think it's, was easy to prove that the future is really tough to predict. Then, of course, we've got conversations like ChatGPT and artificial intelligence, which I never saw coming. Of course, took the world by storm. Now, they just unveiled last week that you can start to take pictures of things, and you can start to take pictures of these things and ask this artificial intelligence how to do various things, like help me lower my bike seat, for example, and it will give you a series of steps. We never would have seen these things coming. The future is really hard to predict. I will say, though, one of the things that was most difficult to predict, something that I never saw coming, was that this was the #1 show on Netflix. Who's with me? I don't think any of us saw that coming. I think we can agree that the future is very difficult to predict. Having said that, there are some things that are fairly predictable. For example, it turns out that the 3 most common words in 2023 are the same as the 3 most common words in 2022, 2021, and 2020. The 3 most common words in 2023 are still, "You're on mute," right? So some things are fairly predictable. Some things are fairly predictable. Another thing that was fairly predictable is the fact that we're dealing with a talent shortage here across the country. One that we haven't seen really in the past 50 years. Unemployment rate across the country is 5.5%. We haven't seen numbers this low since 1969, which, by the way, is when the labor force was half of the size that it is today. We're seeing that fill rates are at historic low levels. We're seeing that help wanted ads are at levels that we've never seen before. Go to restaurants, go to service-based industries, go to hotels. We still see help wanted signs on the door, but what we're not doing is talking about why. A lot of us love to point to COVID and the pandemic as a real reason why the labor force is tighter than it has been in the last 50 years. And that's not entirely true. COVID, an accelerant, no doubt, but it wasn't the sole reason why the labor force is as tight as it is, well, as it was in 1969. I'm going to turn it out to you. Someone just shouted out, I'm not going to pick on anyone, but what are one of the factors? Why is the labor force so tight today? Why is unemployment so low? Go ahead and shout it out. Fewer babies, birth rates are lower than they've been historically ever. Absolutely. Anyone else? Retirements. Yes. Immigration, I heard. Yes. Anything else? New skills. Absolutely. Let's go through these together. Birth rates, we've discussed, thank you for your comment, are lower than they've ever been before. In fact, I think I've actually got a really quick exercise to exemplify that we're reproducing less than we ever have before. So here's what I want you to do. And again, I'm not going to pick on anyone, but I want you to raise your hand nice and high. I want you to think about your mother or your father. And I want you to think about your grandparents on either side of your family. And I want you to think about which one of these 6 people had the most siblings, okay? And I want you to raise your hand nice and high if your parent or your grandparent with the most siblings had 3 or more siblings. Raise those hands nice and high. Raise them if they had 4 or more. Can't really see. 5 or more. 6, 7, look around, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, oh my gosh, 14, I should take a seat, this is going to take a minute, 15, we've got a couple hands up, 16, what's the number over here? I'm going to ask all 3, oh, we got 4, what's the number in the very back? 22? Can anyone be 22? We heard a little bit of applause, I'm not sure why. I guess the next follow-up question is, does anyone have 22 children? No, we're not reproducing. In fact, I think our only chance at sustainable population growth is probably this guy. If you didn't get that one, talk to the millennial beside you, they'll fill you in, no problem at all. But it's not just here in Canada that birth rates are low. You're seeing in Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau. We're seeing that the United States is 1.68. We think that this fight for talent is just a domestic fight for talent. It's not. It's a global fight for talent. Japan, China are really struggling. Germany really struggling. Puerto Rico, Japan really struggling. Another factor, of course, is that we're seeing retirement rates, are rates that we haven't seen before. I've got some American figures here, but we can take about a 1-to-10 ratio. South of the border, about 10 to 12,000 people are turning 65 every single day. A lot of people are coming up to me and say, Eric, well, that's all well and good, but 75 is the new 65, right? To which I say, yes. And if you think a lot of people are retiring now, just give it 5 or 10 years. We're going to see even more. We're also seeing new business applications skyrocket here in Canada, which means the workforce is essentially reconfiguring right in front of our eyes. We're seeing new businesses created left, right, and center. The talent pool that we used to be able to pull from is no longer there. This is really happening, and I don't think we're talking about this enough because of the acceleration of technology and our accessibility to it. The World Economic Forum says that we're entering the 4th industrial revolution right now, one where we're not moving steps forward anymore, we're moving exponential leaps. So think of the 18th century, think of the steam engine, think of 19th century, think of the assembly line, think of the 20th century, think of early computing, early robotics, the technology that got us to the moon. Now think of Industry 4.0, think of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the things that has robots doing backflips, all this artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, Firefly, DALL-E, all these technologies that we're just starting to hear about now, which, by the way, is just the very tip of the iceberg. And look, I think we know that intuitively the world around us is moving fast, but it's very difficult to put our thumb on just how fast the world around us is moving. So I wanted to search for a theory that I thought I could share with you today that helps us put things into perspective. Just how fast is the world around us moving? And I actually stumbled across a theory that I thought would be very valuable to you. It was coined in 1958 by a gentleman by the name of Buckminster Fuller, who was also actually responsible for the Agrodome in Montreal, which is just a nice little sort of side story. But what he was trying to understand is how fast is information transporting itself? How fast are we as a society learning? And what he discovered is that before the year 1900, the amount of information that we had access to doubled roughly every 100 years. So from 1700 to 1800, the amount of information that we had access to doubled. And from 1800 to 1900, it doubled again. But interestingly enough, around the year 1900, because of technological advancements around us, the time it now took for information to double didn't take 100 years anymore, it only took 50. And it continued to double at a halved rate. So from 1900 to 1950, the amount of information that we had access to doubled. And from 1950 to 75, it doubled again. From 75 to 88, it doubled again. To 93, it doubled again, and so on and so forth. All the way back in 2020, IBM confirmed that because of the build-out of the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, this will lead to the doubling of knowledge every 12 hours. So if we think the world is moving quickly now, just give it until dinner tonight and it'll be moving even faster, which leaves us in a bit of an interesting spot, doesn't it? If the future is impossible to predict, which I think we can agree is true, the talent shortage is here and the world keeps moving faster, how do we build incredible teams that are ready for the future of work? That's what I've spent my time trying to figure out. What is it that great leaders, that great small businesses, that great organizations are doing that others simply aren't? What can we put into practice today that will allow us to not just attract great talent, but retain the great talent that we've got? And if I can summarize everything I'm about to share with you next, what I'll summarize in saying is that the best attraction strategy is actually a good retention strategy. If we can create places of work that people love to be a part of, and to be clear, I'm not talking about pizza parties and retreats and hand-holding sessions. I'm talking about connected to the community. I'm talking about being connected to the purpose. I'm talking about being connected to each other. This is truly a recipe for success. So the question is, how do we do that? How do we build great teams from the ground up? Turns out it comes down to 3 specific things. Number 1, we have to build a deep sense of trust. Trust is the foundation of every great team. Second, we have to isolate and remove friction. The world around us is changing faster than it ever has before, perhaps only a fraction of the speed that it will in the years to come. And third, when the friction is gone, we still have to be able to create a culture of experimentation. Now, for those of you who want to take pictures and take notes, please feel free to do so. I also just want to invite you to be able to download all of the resources at the end of this keynote as well. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Let's go ahead and dive in. How do we build a deeper sense of trust on our team? What does that actually look like? Intuitively, we know what trusting relationships feels like. You know what happens when we trust our family, our colleagues, when we trust the food on our plates, the government in office, and we know what happens when we have that absence of trust. It doesn't feel relaxing, it feels anxiety-inducing. The problem is, very rarely do we understand how to tangibly build a deeper sense of trust and community and belonging on our team. So I thought today I would share with you a couple of stories about great leaders who have done just that. Now, I mentioned I'm from Cranbrook, British Columbia. I'm not a big football guy myself, but I thought I would share with you this football story, whether you're a football fan or not, because the leadership behind this gentleman in the orange tie is something that I thought I just had to share with you today. His name is Kevin Stefanski. And, well, a few years ago, Kevin was given a bit of a promotion. He was promoted to be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns football team. And the way I see it, Kevin had 3 strikes against him. The first is that he was promoted to be a head coach for the first time. So he had never been in this head coach position. The second strike, probably the biggest one if you ask me, for those of you that don't know, the second strike is the Cleveland Browns, okay? Some of you do know. The Cleveland Browns are historically not great. In fact, in 2017, they didn't win a single game. In 9 of the 10 years before that, they were dead last in their division. And finally, when they won a game in 2018, the city of Cleveland threw them a parade. Like, I'm not sure if they were celebrating them or mocking them at this point, but they were throwing a parade. It was very poorly attended. Anyways, that's all I'll say about that. The third strike, though, perhaps for those of you that didn't know the Cleveland Browns, might be a little bit bigger. The third strike is that he was promoted to be the head coach in March of 2020. Does anyone remember what was happening in March of 2020? So now we've got this rookie coach on a losing team in the first wave of the pandemic that's somehow supposed to turn this team around. Well, hold on a second. Not only could he not work on drills and fundamentals and plays, he couldn't even have his team in the same room. So what he did is he actually took a page out of his dad book. You'll see this picture here with his 3 kids. He attributes the cohesion and the collaboration of his kids to the conversations that he has with them before bed. He'll quickly as possible, get them to talk about ideas and to create together, which makes me think of my favorite Eleanor Roosevelt line: small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, and great minds discuss ideas. He'll get them to discuss ideas as fast as possible, and he found that the cohesion of the 4 of them, and of course his wife as well, got that much stronger. So he took a page out of his dad book and brought it back to the Cleveland Browns football team. He said, I'm going to try and get everyone on Zoom. And I want to try a bit of an exercise because I think it's important that you know a little bit more about me, and of course I would love to know a little bit more about you. So for 10 minutes, I want to try this drill. I call it the 4H drill. And I want to share with you my heroes, my heartbreaks, my hopes, and my history. And one by one, he started to go through this 4H drill. He started to share about who his heroes were. And they weren't NFL legends, or they weren't people who were coaches or whatever that might have looked like. His heroes were his parents. And he talked about all the things that his parents sacrificed to give him the opportunities that he had today. He then shared one of his heartbreaks, and he decided to go all the way back to high school, where somebody just shattered his heart. And at his lowest low, he needed somewhere to channel that energy, so he took up football. He said that move into football gave him that sense of grit, of resilience, of tenacity, the work ethic that he was so proud of. That heartbreak, it actually led him to the wife and the 3 kids that he's got. He said that heartbreak was the best thing that ever happened to me. He then shared his hopes, but not to win the Super Bowl. He shared what his hopes were for his kids, shared what his hopes were for his family, shared what his hopes were for his country. And when he talked about his history, he talked about his favorite cuisine, his favorite restaurants, his favorite places to vacation, favorite things to do with his family. You could see by the end of this sharing, when he had everyone on Zoom, at the start, they were all kind of leaning back, disengaged. By the end of it, they had leaned in a little bit more. Like they wanted to know more about who Kevin was as an individual. They could relate, they could connect, they could empathize. But Kevin, as the leader, he knew that on a psychologically safe team, you can't force other people to be vulnerable. The second we force people to be vulnerable, a defensive wall comes up. So Kevin knew he couldn't do that. So instead, what he did is he invited folks to share. He said, hey, who wants to share just one of your 4 H's? Sure enough, there was a brave volunteer. I was going to say he raised his hand, but he pressed the raise hand button and said, sure, coach, I'll share with you one of my heartbreaks. He said, but it wasn't actually a heartbreak. It was actually a torn ACL. In 2016, I tore my ACL. I thought my career was over. And immediately everyone on the call knew that was a pretty significant injury. It could have been career ending. But he said, but coach, I was paired with this magical physiotherapist who didn't just rehabilitate me to 100%, he rehabilitated me to 120% because I'm better today than I was back in 2016. But he said, but coach, that's not the best part. The best part is that I got married 8 months ago, and my physiotherapist was the best man at my wedding. I actually gained a best friend in the process too. Another player raised his hand. He said, sure, coach, I'll share with you one of my 4 H's, my hope. He said, it's not really a hope, it's more of a mandate, but when I was 2 years old, my father left my mother and I. My mother had to take on a second job to keep a roof over our head and food on our plates. And I know that I'll never be able to repay her or thank her for the great work that she did to give me the opportunities that I have today, but I'm going to do the very best I can. bring as much of my salary back to my mother so that not only I can transform her life, but she's such a beacon of hope and of positivity, of optimism in our community that if I can transform her life, she's going to transform the community around us too. My mother has become my purpose. My mother is the reason why I play football. And one by one, other players started to share, talk about their 4-H's, started to connect, to empathize, to relate, to the point where it started to go so well, Stefanski had to put a stop to things. He said, hold on, you guys are talking over each other way too much. I can't hear what anyone's saying. So over the next 3 weeks, they started to share more about each other outside of football. And you could see the roots of this team grow into the ground, the foundation become rock solid to the point where finally September comes around. Cleveland Browns team took the field, and they were like a team the NFL hadn't seen in 30 years. Not only did they have a winning record, they made it to the playoffs for the first time in 17 years. They won a playoff game for the first time in 28 years. Stefanski, that rookie coach on the losing team in the first wave of the pandemic, he won Coach of the Year that year for the great work that he did to turn that team around, especially in that short amount of time. After they finally lost that game in the playoffs, he went to the press conference, stood behind the mic, and all the journalists wanted to ask him the same question. They said, Stefanski, what's your secret? How did you turn this team around in such a short amount of time as a rookie coach? And what he said really stuck with me, and I'm hoping it sticks with you too. He said, I'm not sure if I have anything specific for you, but what I will tell you is this. When my team trusts each other off the field, they play better together on the field. I want you to think about that for a second. Do you really know who your team is off the field? So that indeed we can play better together on the field. If there's something that I've learned in the past few months is that trust is a lot like gas station sushi, okay? You're gonna have to work with me on this one. I'm living in Vancouver. I've lived in Vancouver for the better part of the last decade now. And if there's something that we can brag about in Vancouver, it's our knowledge and love for sushi, okay? I mean, look, maybe on both coasts, but we're gonna take a lot of credit in Vancouver. I'm like this close to mercury poisoning, which is totally unrelated, but we know and love our sushi. And I was filling up my vehicle the other day, and I was walking into the gas station a little bit hungry. And of course, there it was, under that flickering LED light that hadn't been changed for 5 years or so. But I was looking at the sushi, and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, this looks really good. Did I get it? No, of course not. I would have had to probably call in sick. I wouldn't have been able to make it here today because, you know, nobody's going to get gas station sushi. But as I'm walking out of the gas station, I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I get that sushi? And I came to conclude that I didn't get it because I didn't know anything about it. Because I didn't know anything about it, I didn't trust it. I didn't know if it had been there for 5 minutes or 5 days. I didn't know if if it was caught fresh in the harbor that morning, whipped up by the resident sushi chef in the back of the gas station. I didn't know. Because I didn't know, I didn't trust, and I find the same thing happens. We look for people with skills, requirements, education, intelligence. We check off all those boxes, and we rush them into the position without actually learning more about them. We skip that trust-building phase. The invitation is that we get to know a little bit more about each other outside of work so that we can trust, communicate, and collaborate better at work too. Turns out that the foundation of every great team is a deep sense of trust. Patrick Lencioni has done some incredible research on this. If we have that foundation of trust, that's when there can be conflict. Now, to be very clear, I don't mean social conflict, bullying, gossiping, being rude, talking behind each other's backs. There's no time for that. What I mean is intellectual conflict, where we can go toe-to-toe, face-to-face, head-to-head, where we can share our very best ideas. This is the foundation of change management. This is the foundation of innovation. We have to be able to share these incredible ideas that we've got because we've got this foundation of trust. If we're not able to share those ideas, if we sit on them, if we keep our mouth shut in meetings, then it's going to be perceived that we're not committed to each other. If we're not committed to each other, then how can we hold each other accountable? If we can't hold each other accountable, then of course we're not going to get the best results. So the question is, how do we build this deeper sense of trust? What's one question that we might be able to ask our teams? I'm going to take you back to 2012, Best Buy. In 2012, Best Buy was having a record year, at least for the first half of the year. And then all of a sudden, this metaphorical storm came rolling over the clouds. And the second half of the year was awful. Best Buy stock tumbled 65, 70%. Does anyone want to guess? What was that metaphorical storm rolling over the clouds? Second half of 2012, what was the threat to Best Buy? Amazon. Amazon started to get into the electronic side of things. Stock tumbled. They could beat Best Buy in price, they could beat them in selection, and perhaps most importantly, they could beat them in convenience. Now you could have a TV dropped off at your back door. How perfect was that? So they brought in a new CEO, his name was Hubert Jolly, and it was Hubert's goal to figure out how to turn this Best Buy team around. He didn't just focus on what was going wrong, though. He also looked at what was going right. He did an analysis of all the Best Buy stores across Canada and the United States, and he found that for some reason, the Best Buy store just outside of Boston was doing 15-20% better than the rest, which was a big surprise because Best Buys are all pretty much laid out exactly the same. The footprint is almost identical. They want you to know, they want you to feel that familiarity when you walk in. Appliances are here, cameras are here, computers are here, so on and so forth. So he decided to do the whole undercover CEO site visit. He put on his hat and his glasses and his mustache and walked into the Best Buy just outside of Boston, trying to figure out what were they doing different than everyone else. He expected that they had slashed prices. He expected they were giving like Costco samples, or maybe had a clown for hire in there, giving out little balloons to kids or something like that. And the truth is, none of that was true. The only thing that he noticed was just slightly different, is that everyone that was on shift that day had slightly bigger smiles on their faces. They were slightly more helpful. And so he decided to go up to one of the associates and ask a couple of questions. He said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions?" She said, "No, not at all." He said, "Okay, do you love working here?" She said, "Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned it, I love working here." He followed that up with, "What do you love so much about working here?" I'll take a quick time out and share with you that I've probably asked this question 5,000 times. What do you love so much about working here? And funny enough, when people indeed do love where they work, the response that they give me to that question is always two words. What do you love so much about working here? And I'm going to put that to a test again. I'm going to ask you in this room what those two words might be. So hypothetically, if you love where you work, and I asked you, what do you love so much about working here? What are the two words you'd respond with? Huh. Isn't that crazy? I didn't narrow it down at all, yet we know how important the people around us are. The question is, are we taking enough time here in Canada to bolster the community and the people that we're working with? He said, "Amazing." Took it back to the conversation. She said, "What do you love so much about working here?" She said, "The people." He said, "Amazing. Tell me, what is it that you're doing here that allows you to feel so connected with the people around you?" You know what she said? She said, "I don't know." Inside, he's thinking, I don't know how to scale this, but like more externally, he's thinking, okay, well, listen, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. He then left the Best Buy, took his hat off, his glasses off, his mustache off, and he decided to come back in the next morning at 9:30 before the gates opened at 10 to see if there was, in fact, something that this team was doing. Because what it told Hubert is that there was something so ingrained in their culture that they were doing to connect with each other that she didn't even realize it anymore. How perfect is that? So he came into the store, he introduced himself, and he found that the supervisors on shift that day would ask their team one single question before the store opened at 10 o'clock. And everyone on shift would have 15 to 30 seconds to respond to that question. They could say the same thing they said every other day of the week, or they could say something brand new. But the question very simply was, what is your dream and how are we at Best Buy here to help you make that dream come true? And one by one, for 15 to 30 seconds, everyone would share a dream, a goal, something they were excited about. Whether it's financial, educational, it's travel, maybe it's sport, maybe it's something to do with her family. One of my favorite ones, somebody said, ever since I was a 10-year-old girl, it was my dream to be able to go to Disneyland with my family, and my family just could not afford it. And so for 30 years, I've been saving so that one day I could take my family to Disneyland. It just so happens, this Christmas, I get to take my 7 and my 5-year-old and my husband to Disneyland. We're going for the first time. I just can't wait. What would happen is these dreams, these goals would come true. They would come back, they would share, they would celebrate each other. And this connection, this cohesion, all of a sudden resulted in the performance of that Best Buy to be way higher than it was ever before. Not because it was forced, but because it was invited. Beautiful. Hubert says, this is something that I can scale. He brought it back to all the Best Buys across the country and in Canada. He even brought it to corporate headquarters. And over the next 8 years, Best Buy stock was up about 800%. Incredible what happens. ADP did a huge research study last year that said those that trusted each other were 15 times as likely to be engaged. Okay, that's great. I've got a bit of a bone to pick with this, though. Engagement. We've been focusing on engagement for 30 years now as if engagement is what we fix. Engagement is not what we fix. Engagement is what happens when we fix the contributing factors to engagement. Engagement isn't an input. Engagement is an outcome. The contributing factors to engagement are belonging, trust, being seen, heard, and understood, being part of something bigger than just our job scope. Of course, the world around us now is busier than it's ever been. It's harder to create this time and space to feel connected. I mean, take a look at this. I mean, maybe just skip the numbers, which are staggering. Take a look at some of these logos. How many of these logos were around 15 years ago? Like Snapchat, no. I mean, it's not even Twitter anymore. YouTube, no. Instagram, I mean, texting, yes, but you had to press 5 3 times for the letter N, right? It was a slightly different experience. It's come now to the point where Pew Research says that we're living 31.5-hour days. How is that even possible? We know that there are 24 hours in the day, of which we're sleeping roughly 7 of them. For 42% of the day, it turns out we're multitasking. I think that we can agree that when we're trying to do 2 things at once, we're not doing anything all that well. Which leads me to this whole generational conversation that we still love to keep having. I'll be honest, I'm a self-diagnosed millennial. I know that because I'm narcissistic, entitled, love avocado toast, have helicopter parents. You know, I've checked off all the boxes. But I've got a bit of a problem with this conversation suggesting that millennials want to climb faster than anyone else, that they need more than everything else, than anyone else. This conversation, by the way, about generations, it's not brand new. It didn't just start with millennials or Gen X or maybe even Gen Z. Take this quote, for example. The children now love luxury. They have bad manners and contempt for authority. They show disrespect for elders and love chatter in the place of exercise. Does anyone know whose quote this is? This is a Socrates quote. It's not exactly brand new. So I thought I would try and figure it out. I would figure it out. Let me just ask you. Now, again, I'm not going to pick on anyone. Just shout out a few numbers. Between which years were millennials born? Go ahead. 81 to 97, 96. Anyone else? 2000. Anyone else? 79 to 84. Okay, we've got a pretty good range here. We've got a pretty good range. Actually, let's put an end to this debate right now. I did a lot of research on this, trying to figure out exactly when millennials were born. I plotted it out on a chart, started with the reliable Wikipedia, and expanded a little bit from there. It turns out that actually nobody knows when these millennials were born. Nobody knows. We're talking from 1977 to 2004, which is, by the way, half of the Canadian population. That's a lot of avocado toast. I think we're looking at this conversation wrong. We're trying to generalize a generation we don't even understand. What I would invite you to consider is that this generation doesn't want anything different than the previous generation had. What this generation wants is to be seen, heard, and understood, don't we all? Maybe I would invite you to consider that the fastest way to speed up human connection is actually to slow down. The world around us is busier than it's ever been before, and if we want to truly build great teams that are rooted in trust and belonging, this is the answer. I would invite you to move from checking on to checking in. I check on my pizza in the oven, okay? I check on my turkey in the oven. I check in with the people that I care about. It's an easy shift. Checking on to me seems so like org chart, so hierarchical. Checking in is just getting a little bit lower, eye to eye, heart to heart, asking those basic questions, like what did you enjoy about last week? What could we improve on? What mistakes did you make? What did you learn? How can I help? My favorite is, what are you most excited about? Such a non-invasive, easy question to really maybe connect on. Maybe it's a sporting event. Maybe it's family travel. Maybe we can relate. To enhance trust, slow down to speed up connection. Learn more about who is on your team, not just what they do. In the leadership positions you're in, don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes the best way to get trust is to give it first. And forget these generational stereotypes. At the end of the day, we're all people looking for love, looking for connection, and looking to be a part of something big. Once we've built this deep sense of trust, that's when we'll have to isolate and remove friction. As we discussed, the world around us is moving faster than it ever has before. However, in the research that I've done, I've learned that there are 2 things that people hate. The first is change, and the second is the way things are. Kind of puts us in a tough spot. We don't want to rock the boat too much, but we know that we can't stand still either. Instead, what I would suggest is make a small 1-degree shift. A 1-degree shift is that smallest viable change we can make once we found the root of the friction to alleviate some of that tension. But don't just take it from me, take it from the 2002 British cycling team. In 2002, the British cycling team was not in a good spot. In fact, in their 76-year history of the Olympics, not only had they not won gold, but they hadn't even made it to the podium. They tried team after team, coach after coach, and all they got was failure after failure until 2002. They brought in a new coach. His name was Dave Brailsford. And it was Brailsford's goal to figure out how to turn this team around. But he knew that he couldn't rock the boat too much, and if they did what they've always done, they'd get what they've always got, which was nearly last place. So he decided to take this marginal gain 1 degree shift approach. He asked these 5 questions to find where the root of the problem was and how to alleviate some of that tension. He first asked, where is the friction? Well, the team wasn't winning. What should he be doing about it? He thought, maybe we should buy the team better equipment. Maybe we should push them harder and harder. The problem is, where that was going wrong is that they already had the best equipment, and the harder he pushed the riders, the more they got burned out, the more they got sick. So where was the root of that problem? Where was it really going wrong? And what he found is that when the riders were on the road, they were getting sick too often. He couldn't say, well, we're not going to not travel anymore. Instead, what he did is he made a 1 degree shift. He brought a surgeon in to teach the team how to wash their hands more effectively. And surprise, surprise, it started to work. He said, what else can we do? He said, I'm going to give everyone a portable hand sanitizer bottle to wash their hands. That actually started to work too. Then he said, okay, in late 2003, he said he put a PSA out to the cycling community that said, not out of any disrespect at all, but instead of doing handshakes, we're going to do elbow bumps instead. I mean, he's like 17 years ahead of his time with the whole, he was the elbow bump pioneer, and sure enough, it worked. His riders got sick less. He then said, well, what other changes can we make? He noticed that when the riders were on the road, they were getting sick too often. Well, and they weren't sleeping very well. So he said, well, we couldn't get new mattresses and we couldn't get new hotel rooms. That wasn't in the budget. But what we can do is put a heart rate monitor on our riders and notice what temperature they optimally slept at. He then made 1 degree shifts in the thermostat until different riders slept better. He then decentralized this out to the team. He asked everyone to be a part of this. He said, what 1 degree shifts can we make in our diets? What can we make in our fitness routines? What can we make in our sleep schedules? All of these different combinations started to come together, and 2 things started to happen. Number 1, the riders started to ride way better. Number 2, they started to build the sense of trust, of gamification, so that change wasn't something that was resisted, it was something that was excitable. They almost had fun doing it. Someone said, Coach, why don't we bring our pillows from home? It doesn't take that much space. And when we're exhausted at the end of the day and our head hits the pillow, it'll feel a little bit more like home. Another rider said, Coach, I noticed that there's some dirt, some dust in the gears of my bike. It's slowing me down. I can tell just a little tiny bit. She said, it's not coming from the track, it's coming from the maintenance truck. Now, to get a new maintenance truck, that cost about $100,000. Instead, what they did is they swept and vacuumed out the back of the truck and painted that black floor that was hiding all the dust and dirt. They painted it white. Now you could see when dust and dirt was being built up. 6 years of hundreds of these 1 degree shifts, and off they went to Beijing in 2008. Now, not only did they make it to the podium, but they won 7 out of 10 gold medals. And if you think that was a fluke, in 2012, the same thing happened, 7 out of 10 gold medals. In 2012, Dave Brailsford, he was knighted. His name is now Sir Dave Brailsford, which I think is a nice little cherry on top. He was poached from the Olympic cycling team and assigned to coach the Tour de France team, which before 2012 had never won the Tour de France. And between 2012 and 2023, the Brits have won 6 times. A 1 degree shift is not that much. In fact, even if we go back to the moon landing in '69, if that shuttle was off by just 1 degree at takeoff, you probably wouldn't even have been able to notice. But over a journey to the moon, we would have missed the moon by about 3,400 kilometers, or twice the diameter of the moon. Compounded, these 1 degree shifts, when we include everyone, make a huge difference. And knowing that we've got big goals, big strategic initiatives that can be anxiety-inducing, daunting, overwhelming, what if instead we looked at the little 1 degree shifts that got us just a little bit closer? After all, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. To reduce friction, find the root of the problem, make these little 1 degree shifts, and know that because the world around us is changing so fast, don't forget to reflect and revise along the way. Because what we're going to find is that there's going to be a time where the friction is gone. And there's 2 options. Number 1, we can take our foot off the gas, or number 2, we can use this creativity and this innovation that got us to where we are to where we're going next. We can create this culture of experimentation. In fact, a company that's done this really well, whose stock is up over 100 times in the past 12 years, happens to be Domino's Pizza. 2008, 2009, Domino's was not in a great spot. In fact, they were $900 million in debt, almost ready to file for bankruptcy. They brought in a new CEO, and he was spending millions of dollars to get people to come and buy their pizzas. And the truth is, it was working, but just very temporarily. People were buying their pizzas, but just once. I came across some of the surveys, and people were saying things like, is this crust made out of cardboard? Is this sauce ketchup? And is this cheese even a dairy product? Like, people were not happy with Domino's Pizza. But what Patrick decided to do, the CEO of Domino's, is he decided to get his team to make small 1 degree shifts to fix it. He brought in various chefs into a test kitchen. So try hundreds of different combinations of herbs and spices, of different cheese combinations, of different pepperonis and meats, and see what we can do. Test everything along the way, and guess what? 18, 24 months later, they had pretty much climbed themselves out of debt. The friction was largely gone. Now, two questions were asked of Domino's at this point. They said, well, who's your biggest competition? Is it Pizza Hut? Is it Papa John's? Is it some other pizza shop? They said, no, our biggest competition is who we were yesterday. We're trying to do just things a little bit different. The follow-up question was, well, we've all heard it before. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? They said, no. If it ain't broke, it doesn't mean we can't improve it. And so they continued to try to improve every process. Once they had fixed their pizza itself, they said, well, hold on a second, we're a technology company too. Maybe, what if we put a pizza profile and a pizza tracker? That wasn't broken at the time, but maybe we could improve it. They said, hold on, well, maybe we don't need drivers in our delivery cars. Maybe we can put ovens in the back. Maybe we can actually work with cities and pave potholes on our most common routes, which they actually did, so there's less literal friction. They even tried drone delivery, which, by the way, didn't work, but I got to applaud them for trying. Then, of course, they said, well, we can actually tip you to come and buy your pizzas. Continue to experiment, and it actually started to work. I just heard that yesterday they've actually now got pinpoint delivery, where you don't even have to be at home. You could be at a park, and they'll deliver specifically to a park. My favorite one, though, is they said, well, why don't we try opening pizza shops in Italy? Did that work? No, not at all. Actually, this is my favorite, surprising no one, which is completely unnecessary. But they learned a lot from it. And they found that this culture of experimentation saw that their stock actually performed better than Google's parent company, Alphabet. Today, they're up about 120 times from that low point in 2009. It turns out that when everyone on the team is allowed to solve meaningful problems, when we're all allowed to contribute and work larger than just our job scope and our job role, that engagement, productivity, and motivation goes through the roof. And I've come to conclude that it's not just because we're allowed to solve meaningful problems, but on a deeper level, what we're saying to our team is, I trust you. I trust the experience that you've got. I trust your opinions, your backgrounds to say, hey, maybe we can actually do this together. So the question then comes into what happens if everyone is included and we're asked to make small 1-degree shifts? I'll give you a quick Canadian story of Shreddy's cereal. Over the past few years, Shreddy's cereal has not done all that well. Their sales have been sliding, and they thought, especially with the next generation, millennials, Gen Z, that Shreddy's didn't taste good. And that actually wasn't the truth. They actually thought maybe a layer lower, there's something else that the real problem is, and it turns out that Shreddy's, at least to the younger generations, that Shreddy's was boring. It couldn't compete against the chocolatey and sugary cereal. So what Shreddy's decided to do is to bring a tactical SWAT team of 5 people together. They gave them no budget. They gave them 3 weeks. They said, we want you to make just small little changes that preserves the integrity of Shreddy's, the Shreddy's that we all know and love, but makes it just a little bit more exciting. There are no stupid ideas. Bring us anything you've got. And 3 weeks later, here's what they came back with. Check it out.
Shreddies are supposed to be square.
Have any of these diamond shapes gone out?
New Diamond Shreddies cereal. Same 100% whole grain wheat in a delicious diamond shape.
So, I mean, come on, right? How do you not love the new Diamond Shreddies? They're diamondier than the other ones. I mean, look, I've been talking about a 1-degree shift. I understand this is a 45-degree shift, but the sentiment is all the same. They started small, then they looked at billboards and bus ads, then they took the TV spots, and now they had a national campaign. Now, I mentioned they brought together this tactical SWAT team of 5 people. You might think that they were folks from the C-suite, folks who've been with the company for 20 or 30 years. What they decided to do is to give this task, this assignment, to interns and first-year employees. The person that came up with this idea, his name was Hunter Sommerfeld. He was a 26-year-old intern that had been with the organization for 3 weeks before being put on this assignment. Shreddy's sales were up 18% the next quarter. Things went pretty well. They decided to say, well, what else can we do? What other little shifts can we make? And it turns out another intern on the team said, well, I noticed that every once in a while, we're talking 1 in every like 3 or 4 million Shreddies, there's a manufacturing defect, and the Shreddies don't exactly break. So instead, we've got this like rectangular Shreddies, not a square or diamond one. And they were kind of embarrassed about that. They said, well, what if we looked at this a little bit different? What if we started to market the double Shreddies? What if we could actually be proud of that? What if we could treat it like, I don't know, like a fortune cookie? What if people, when they got this in their cereal box, they could take a picture of it and tweet it on the Double Shreddies contest? What if we could start awarding people and making some of these wishes come true? People were buying Shreddies as lottery tickets now. They weren't even eating them. And Shreddies sales continued to skyrocket. Shreddies has re-solidified itself as one of Canada's staples once again. And the truth is, we can all bring this culture of experimentation back to our team. I would invite you to ask your team, what should we start, stop, and continue doing? Over your time here in Calgary, you're going to learn an incredible amount of great new practices that you can bring back to your team. And knowing that the world is moving faster than it ever has before, maybe we can break free from some of those practices that no longer serve us. And my guess is that 99% of the things that you're doing right now are working really well. And when we end the conversation with what we should continue doing, we validate everything that's working so well. I invite you to have these conversations with everyone on your team. Maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every month, just for 15 minutes. There should be a time constraint on something like this. And what you're going to find is after week 6 or week 8 or week 10, some people are going to say, I don't have any ideas this time. And you're going to say, that's okay. It's equally about generating great ideas as it is about creating this psychologically safe space where everyone can contribute and everyone can share some of their ideas. So to experiment, ask your team, what can we start, stop, and continue doing? Look outside of your company or look outside of your chamber for inspiration, and don't forget to involve everyone. I mentioned that if you wanted any of the resources, you can, I'll just maybe preface by saying there's nothing on the website to buy, even if you tried, so I'm not selling anything. I've just got things like the 4H exercise, different ways to build out a job description, all sorts of ways to just allow you to build this culture of experimentation and friction reducing on your team as well. I'm going to leave it up for just a few more seconds and share with you that in the very short amount of time that we had together today, we're talking about 3 things. Number 1, about building this deep sense of trust. Number 2, about isolating and removing friction. And number 3, creating this culture of experimentation. Give us a couple more seconds. I see quite a few phones up still. But I'm going to wrap it up and say to build incredible teams, 3 things need to happen. Again, build trust, isolate and remove friction, create a culture of experimentation. Minister Anand was up here earlier today and said something that was really incredible to me. She said, a small business is a wonderful way to make an impact on our communities. And with the incredible people in this room today, something that I do not take lightly, not only with a 200,000 business membership with the Canadian Chamber Network, are we able to make Canada as prosperous, as economically powerful as it is. But when I think about a wonderful way to make an impact in our communities, I think about the people that we work with every day. I think about the people that are in our small businesses. I think about the mothers and the sons. I think about the fathers and the daughters. And I think about the incredible opportunity that we have to connect more effectively in the greatest country on earth. We've been talking a lot about the future of work. And one of the quotes that I saw last week, I think it was a Ray Dalio quote. Ray said, "He who lives by the crystal ball is to eat glass," which I thought was really funny and made me think that we're asking the wrong questions about the future of work. Historically, we've been asking, what does the future of work look like? I think the question we should be asking instead is, how can we build an incredible team that can thrive in whatever the future of work looks like? I may not know what tomorrow is going to bring, but with everyone who's as incredible as they are in this room, with the leadership capacities and skills that you've got and your ability to build great teams, I'm here to say that the future indeed is very bright, and I'm very grateful to be able to share any of those little 1-degree shifts along the way that I possibly can. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Are we on? Are we on?
Yes.
Oh, great. Just to stay on schedule, rather than ask questions, I'm going to go right to the audience because I'm sure that you have lots of questions. If not, I have several in reserve. Did I just hear someone? No? Okay, well then I'll ask my favorite question, which is, Eric, what is the one thing, what one assumption or attitude do we need to change as employers to be successful for the future of work?
It's a great question. And in the conversations that I've been having, what I've found is that historically, and I think this is especially prominent pre-COVID, trust has been something that we have to earn. We start at 0, we work our way to 100. And this could take weeks, months, even years sometimes to prove yourself. I think trust, especially post-COVID, especially with maybe when we're not even seeing our teams on a regular basis, maybe it's remote, I think trust has to be given and either validated or verified and then eroded rather than working from 0 to 100. I think we have to assume 100, especially if you're going to take the time to, check references, validate skills, requirements, education. We have to assume that that trustworthy person who's looking for a new opportunity, who's looking for that community, is a trustworthy individual.
When you and I were talking this morning, you asked me a fascinating question. You said, what did I learn in all my years of being a leader that I didn't already know intuitively? I thought it was a fascinating question. How often do we know the right thing to do? We question ourselves. I think as a leader, you question yourself a lot.
Sure.
And I think we need to be open about, like, I love what you said about asking people their opinions and bringing in different perspectives. So how much of it is intuitive and how much do we ignore what we should do?
That question takes me back to the wheel that we would have seen about, how many texts are coming in, how many Slack messages are coming in, how many emails are coming in. I think what needs to happen in a world that's as distracted and noisy as it is today is we have to be able to give ourselves a little bit of time to think. Because your gut probably has the answer, but it's often not as loud as the pinging and digging from the new emails and the new notifications that are coming in. So the question, I think, if I were to sort of rephrase it, is like, what do we need to do to be able to trust our intuition and trust our gut a little bit more? Is make sure that we're creating time and space to allow those thoughts to sink in a little bit more, and to act on what we probably already know is right.
I think the other thing I've learned as a leader is that you have to give people confidence that they can fail and you can fix it.
Sure.
And I think when we're trying to grow and be innovative, the confidence to fail and the teamwork to be behind fixing it is really, one of my colleagues had a great saying. She said, it's your turn to learn. And we need to say that to each other and say, this is not a big deal. We can fix it.
Two things come to mind, though. The ability to fail has to, from a leader's perspective, come from a place of vulnerability. And I think of exemplification too. The leader can't bury their failures too and expect their team to just put their failures on a pedestal right in the limelight. I think we have to be a little bit more public about those failures and work through them together. But also, recognizing that trust and psychological safety are such a foundational part of such great teams. We have to be able to create that environment where people do feel able to fail. Saying we are allowing you to fail is one thing. One exercise that I would invite you to consider is going back to maybe previous months or previous even quarters. Share with the team, and just a 15-minute exercise. What's the biggest mistake that you made in the past 90 days, and what did we learn from that? And the reason that unlocks a different level of safety is because the mistake has already happened and the team's already recovered from it. But by unveiling the mistake that's happened in the past and making that more sociable, making that more acceptable, it's easier as we move forward to make those mistakes again, knowing that we're going to be able to laugh about it as a team and as a community moving forward.
Absolutely.
We do have a question.
Hi, Charlotte from the Thunder Bay Chamber of Commerce. So we've been trying to, empower our employers to do this type of work with their teams. And what we're hearing is we don't have the time to go to the session to learn what we need to do because we're short-staffed and we're working 20 hours a day. Any tips for us as chambers as to how to get that engagement from employers to take the time to do this type of work in their organizations?
Sure, it's a great question. Often, if you can talk to those businesses or those leaders and actually point to people who are doing it well, perhaps even their competitors, it'll be a very quick way to get them to think a little bit different about where they have time and where they're allocating resources to take some of these learnings into place. Would you add anything?
Yeah.
I'd say point to the competition and say they're doing it really well, and also, they're beating you a little bit in the market as well. Perhaps maybe we should reallocate some of that time.
Okay.
Oh, we do have one more question here on number 5. Yeah.
Hi, Paul Mazzanti, Chamber of Commerce, Brantford Brant. You spoke a lot about trust. You spoke just now about vulnerability. Our teams that we work with are created of a vast diversity of people, of personality types. Not everyone is going to respond to an invitation to be vulnerable with enthusiasm.
Sure.
what advice would you give to teams that have someone who's just not willing to go there? Because there are benefits to reap. I think everyone can see what you're saying there, but how do you get that team member on board who doesn't want to become vulnerable that way?
Sure, it's a great question. The number one thing you can't do is force it. That has completely the negative effect. There are a series of stages of trust and psychological safety, though. First of all, exclusion is not safe at all if you don't even let somebody in the same room. The analogy that I like to think of is a party. The first stage is inviting someone to the party. The second stage would be inviting them to dance, like actually included. You're there, but then you're actually included. The third stage would actually be saying, hey, do you want to change the music? Or do you want to help indicate what the food or what the beverages are here? By inviting them to be a part of the conversation in the first place, they're in the room, they're part of the team. They're not forced to get onto the dance floor. They're not forced to bring different pops or chips or whatever it might be, but the fact is they're there. And there's going to be a point where either they get more comfortable and more willing to get onto the dance floor, or they're going to be a happy bystander that they're just happy to be included. My invitation is to not force any of these things and not suggest that there has to be a benchmark of sharing and a benchmark of vulnerability that we have to hit. The fact is you're creating the time and the space for these conversations to happen, which is imperative and really important. And whatever happens after that will be right for everyone in the room.
I'm at my,
This is great. Over here.
I have noticed that even with as people become even more educated, everyone's getting a master's degree and this or that, there seems to be a crisis in confidence in a lot of employees. And I don't know if this is mixed with some people being introverted, and then the combination can be stifling. And I really am interested in hearing everyone's ideas. But when someone's not feeling confident, it really inhibits the group's ability to, collaborate. So what's your advice in helping people find that confidence in themselves so that they can contribute?
I've got an interesting exercise for you to try, especially if someone's worried about bringing their ideas forward. Try this. Get everyone that you're having the meeting with to think of who their favorite company might be, whatever that company is. Often people will say something like Disney or something like that, the magic of Disney. And bring that same problem that you would have wanted that individual with a lack of confidence to solve, and tell them, put on Disney's hat for a second. How would Disney approach this same problem that we're having? Because what happens is when we put on Disney's hat, we're removing ourselves from the idea itself, and we're actually presenting it as a different organization might. And what happens is we say, yes, and now how might we make that ours? Bring that back from the safe space that was a different organization's hat on. Say, great, Disney would do it that way. Now bring it back into our organization. Take what you've just said, which by the way is brilliant. Now make it more practical or more applicable for us. How can we do it here too? It's a really nice way to make it safe and also bring it back into the conversation.
Thank you.
Awesome.
So we talked about the kinds of attitudes that employers need to change. Let's talk about employees.
Okay.
And talent.
Sure.
The world's our oyster right now.
Well, that's the assumption anyways.
Yeah, I think it is. And we want to attract that top talent. At the same time, talent wants to keep themselves fresh, right?
For sure.
What kind of skills should they be looking to develop?
Well, I mean, historically, we've called them soft skills. I think we're probably going to have a new term for them. Soft implies that they're less important than the hard skills, but the ability to monotask, to problem solve, to critically think, to build deeper relationships, to analyze various situations at the same time, to communicate more effectively, to write more effectively. I think the first and foremost, the thing that we need to do is be able to think critically, especially in the world that's moving faster than it ever has before. All information is not good information, and to be able to filter the good from the not so good is really important. But I think often what I've said is that the long way is the shortcut. Chances are, if we are trying to take the shortcut, we're not going to get to where we want to go as fast. Take that little bit of extra time to have a conversation with somebody else in the situation. Take that little bit of extra time to do the research. Take that little bit of extra time to find out sort of the whole story. And I bet that we're going to get to where we want to go a little bit faster.
Perfect.
We've got one more question here if we wanted to get to that.
We've got 35 seconds.
Okay.
Quick question.
Okay. Cindy Bester, Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce.
Great.
You talked about vulnerability, and I think a lot of the chamber leaders are on vulnerability overload, not just for our staff, but for our members and our families and all of those things. So there's that overload. I loved how you referenced sushi and gas station sushi, because there's a lot of bad sushi out there right now. And so trying to find that balance so that we're being authentic with our vulnerability, but that we're also not being taken advantage of as those leaders. Any thoughts about that?
Do you mind just rephrasing that into how did you interpret the question, Kayla?
I think so what's your top box question?
As leaders, we've been very vulnerable. How would you suggest that we take care of ourselves in the HR world while we're taking care of those staff that we need to take care of and the members that we need to take care of?
Vulnerability is being able to share with your team that you need a bit of a break too. Vulnerability is recognizing that you might have been going a little bit too hard. Vulnerability is not just talking about pushing things harder, faster, stronger. Vulnerability is showing weaknesses as well. And I would invite you or any leader who's in a position of potential burnout or currently burned out to take a moment to pause and reflect on where you're deriving your energy from, where it's being depleted fastest, and how you can ultimately get back to a level of, if we use the CN analogy, back on the tracks. And don't be afraid to be open with that with your team as well.
Okay, just want to finish off here to say thank you to Eric.
Thank you.
It was every bit as inspiring as I expected, and I think everyone's got a lot of ideas they're going to take back. We're very happy to be able to give away copies of Eric's book, Rethink Work, and all event registrants have been entered into a draw, and names are going to be drawn later today, and winners will be contacted by email.